It's hard to believe, but it's been 40 years since Back to the Future first hit theaters in 1985. While the story wrapped up in 1990 with Part 3, the adventure didn't truly end there. Sure, we got the animated series in 1991 and the Telltale game in 2010, but none of it quite compares to that time we actually got to climb into a DeLorean and travel through Hill Valley history. That's right, I'm talking about Back to the Future, the ride. And let me tell you, that was a ride that really took us places. You know, when I was a kid and I would inevitably finish watching all 3 Back to the Future movies, I always desperately wanted more. 3 movies weren't enough. I remember going to Universal Studios and loving the Back to the Future ride. It was by far my favorite movie ride of all time. Now that just might be pure nostalgia talking. I don't know. And I don't care. Admittedly, I haven't been to Universal Studios as an adult, so who knows if that's a fair statement. What's your favorite movie-themed ride of all time? Let me know in the comments. In today's video, we're going to explore how the ride got made, and we'll also uncover what we learn about the Back to the Future universe in the storyline that unfolds before the ride begins. If you love this 8-passenger DeLorean as much as I do, then hit that like button and turn on the flux capacitor as we dive into the chaotic past of Back to the Future, the ride. It's the late 1980s. Plans for the Back to the Future ride were already underway. The catalyst for this ambitious project can be traced back to a challenge thrown by George Lucas at his buddy Steven Spielberg. In 1986, during a visit to Universal's King Kong attraction, Steven Spielberg was told by Lucas that Universal could never create a simulator ride as groundbreaking as Star Tours, Disney's pioneering motion simulator attraction. Lucas, in his usual brotherly way, taunted Spielberg, suggesting that Disney had the superior simulator ride with Star Tours. If you've ever ridden Star Tours at Disneyland, you'll know that the screen was small and flat, yet the motion made you feel like you were truly flying through space. Spielberg, never one to back down from a challenge, responded by asking Peter Alexander, one of Universal's creative leads, to see what he could do about Back to the Future. And just like that, the race was on. By 1988, Universal was deep into the development process of the ride. At first, they envisioned a high-speed roller coaster, but Spielberg quickly realized that a roller coaster wasn't the right choice. It was fast, sure, but it didn't allow for the immersive storytelling that was at the heart of Back to the Future. How could they make guests feel like they were traveling through time without sacrificing the narrative experience? The solution was simple in concept, but extremely ambitious in execution. A motion simulator ride that puts the guests behind the wheel of the famous DeLorean. Tests were being done in front of an OmniMax theater screen. An OmniMax screen is a huge dome-like screen that wraps around the audience. I always used to think that every IMAX screen looked like this. OmniMax was the only IMAX format I ever saw when I was younger. They always had it at different theme parks and science centers, places that show nature documentaries and stuff like that. Universal Studios hired filmmaker Greg McGillivray and Richard Edlund to bring the ride to life. Greg McGillivray had a lot of experience with the OmniMax format through various aviation-type documentaries he directed. Richard Edlund was on the special effects team for the original Star Wars movies, so it seemed like the project was in good hands. But things didn't go so well. When the pair showed a sample of what they had been working on, it was a huge letdown for everyone who saw it. It was basically just a travel documentary through time, but with the DeLorean. That may not sound like the worst thing in the world, but not being the worst thing in the world isn't much of a selling point at a theme park, you know what I mean? Back to the Future, the ride. It's not the worst thing in the world. Not only that, but it was also making people sick while testing it. 2 of which were Bob Gale and Robert Zemeckis, who weren't directly involved but got to see the tests. They hated it. In the book, Back to the Future, The Ultimate Visual History, there was a reference to an advertisement in the Los Angeles Times in 1989 that gives us an idea of what the original ride was going to be about. Buckle up, Doc Brown has plans to take you on the ride of your life in his time-traveling wonder car. The hit movie Back to the Future is going to become the ride of your life at Universal Studios Hollywood in 1991. Doc will take you climbing, diving, banking, and blasting back to the dinosaurs at the dawn of time. You'll catapult to Kitty Hawk for a run-in with the Wright brothers, rocket to Venice for a brush with Da Vinci, whoosh through Niagara Falls. Doc Brown will literally hang you up on the brink of disaster and let you teeter on the edge. Then plunge you down, down, down in the steepest drop imaginable. You're on your way to the most unbelievable time travel adventure ever imagined. That doesn't sound right for a Back to the Future ride. Luckily, Universal Studios eventually scored the talent of Douglas Trumble, the visual effects wizard behind 2001, A Space Odyssey, and Blade Runner, to name a couple of classics. Again, I'll reference the same book by Michael Klastorin, Back to the Future: The Ultimate Visual History, where Trumble says this about his reaction to the previous designer's take on the ride. It was largely based on live action, and I said you can't shoot live action. You have to completely control the camera with motion control. Otherwise, it's not going to look right. One of the things that was obvious in the original photography was that blurring and strobing was really horrible when you moved the camera. If you ever try to move an IMAX camera really fast in a dome, it becomes really nauseating. He told the people in charge at Universal Studios that the ride should be entirely visual effects with almost no live action, and that it be computer-controlled movement of the camera through a miniature set of locations in the world of Back to the Future. Yeah, you see, the relationship between Douglas Trumble and Steven Spielberg had been severed after their earlier collaboration on Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Trumble's meticulous, perfectionist approach to visual effects often clashed with Spielberg's fast-paced, urgent filmmaking style, creating tensions that led to their split. However, when it came time to develop Back to the Future: The Ride, Spielberg recognized that Trumble's unique expertise was crucial to making this ambitious project work. Despite their past differences, Spielberg agreed to bring Trumble on board, knowing that his groundbreaking work with visual effects, his innovative use of miniatures, and his experience in large format filmmaking made him the perfect person to bring the ride's time travel adventure to life. Before Back to the Future: The Ride, Trumble had already gained experience with immersive motion-based rides through his work on ShowScan technology in the 1970s. ShowScan was a high frame rate file system that combined 60 frame per second film with motion simulators, creating smoother, more immersive experiences. Trumble built massive miniatures, oversized models that would look stunning when projected on a huge dome. We're talking some of the biggest miniatures ever built at the time. Filming them required special rigs so that every tilt and pan matched the motion of the ride vehicle. Syncing the filmed footage with the DeLorean motion platforms became a major challenge. The team spent countless hours testing the film footage, adjusting the ride's motions, and reworking the visuals to make sure everything meshed perfectly. They even consulted with medical experts to ensure riders wouldn't feel disoriented or sick. In fact, the consultant suggested adding water fountains at the exit of the ride to help guests rehydrate after their intense adventure. While the mechanics and basic concept for the ride itself were finally progressing forward, the actual story that catapults the ride was still very much undecided. The producers of the ride were kicking around different ideas. One where Doc's dog, Einstein, somehow commandeered the DeLorean and found himself blasting through time. I mean, he's done it before. Why stop now? There was also a bizarre storyline where we find out that Doc has an evil twin that we, the audience, are in pursuit of. At the time, future Ant-Man director Peyton Reed was the go-to guy for expanded universe stuff in the Back to the Future franchise. He had been an assistant cameraman on the making of Back to the Future Part 2 and director of the making of Back to the Future Part 3. He would also go on to write and direct multiple episodes of the animated series just a couple of years down the line. He and his writing partner, Mark Cowan, were responsible for coming up with the 45-minute pre-show that propels the events of the ride. The plot of the ride goes like this. You, the park guest, arrive at the Institute of Future Technology, run by Doc Brown. Okay, wait a second. So things have definitely changed since the ending of Back to the Future 3. Doc used to be so adamant about not sharing any information about the future or time travel in general. All that crazy stuff that could affect the time continuum, don't you know? I know he loosens up on that by the end of Part 3 when he says, "Your future is whatever you make it. So make it a good one." But man, did he go in the other direction since then. Now he has a very public institute where random guests come to see all the inner workings of time travel and his various inventions. He just lets any old Joe and Jane Doe travel through time.
If you are one of our time travel volunteers, we extend a special welcome.
What the hell happened, Doc?
And hope that you enjoy your journey through time.
We get a transmission from 2015 where Doc is flying the DeLorean through the skyways of Hill Valley. He tells us, the volunteers, that Biff has gone missing from the year 1955. Yet again! We see documentary footage of Doc Brown meeting Thomas Edison, witnessing the Wright brothers' first flight, rubbing elbows with Albert Einstein, and dropping in on one of Richard Nixon's speeches. He also gets to see the Beatles giving a press conference. Then, back in 2015, we see Doc still on the search for Biff. This is basically just to stall for time while we, the audience, waited in the balmy-ass sun to get on the ride. I like how he mentions the Zemeckis Gale diagram, and then he shoves it into the Mr. Fuel machine. It's a nice nod to the writer and director. I also like how we learn about his other inventions. He made an automatic pancake machine, an automatic dog feeder, which looks like it works better than it did at the beginning of Back to the Future 1. He also made a static-o-matic hair chair so you can get a haircut like his. He made something called the Dynamatic Bronzer Gun, which it just looks fiercely dangerous, and some sort of toast maker. I guess he really did peak with the DeLorean time machine, didn't he? Doc ends up back at the Institute where he shows us around his laboratory, and we see some more inventions. A manure transforming Powerball that can heat a house for an entire winter. The manure actually had a purpose later on in the ride, but audiences never got to see that. I'll get to that later. It seems that Doc has also perfected the mind-reading machine from the first movie. Of course, trouble immediately rears its butt head. We see Biff Tannen on some security cameras sneaking around the Institute. How he was smart enough to break in without staff noticing? We'll never know. I guess they're just stupid, which is odd for scientists, but whatever. I just don't think Biff would have been industrious enough to pull all of this off. These segments are very reminiscent of the live-action segments from the animated series. Makes sense since Peyton Reed is responsible for those too. It is a lot of fun to watch. It was also better than nothing while waiting in line for what felt like a whole feature-length film. It's great seeing Tom Wilson reprise his role as Biff here. Same with Christopher Lloyd. They were in top form as their characters. Also, remember this girl who was one of Biff's cronies in Back to the Future 2? Well, the actress Darlene Bogle plays a spokesperson for the Institute here. Doc explains the new and improved volunteer DeLorean and how it works. It's now a convertible, which if you think about it, isn't that like supremely dangerous? What about the radiation? What about getting your head just chopped off or what? I don't know. I'm thinking too much about this. Biff pulls some Home Alone hijinks on the staff, then he's somehow smart enough to capture Doc in his own jail, in his own office. Why does Doc have that anyway? Biff's motivation is literally to just joyride through time. That's his whole reason for doing all of this. This is where we come in. After we watch a safety video with crash dummies who discourage us from smoking and eating while on the ride, they also explain how not to hit our heads or break off our limbs. 8 people could fit in each DeLorean, which was placed on a hydraulic motion base. The seats faced a 70-foot dome screen, so almost everywhere you looked, you were immersed in the chaotic adventure. So, Biff steals the DeLorean and catapults himself across time. Our mission? Chase Biff and save our timeline from his antics. You blast through the futuristic Hill Valley in 2015, where, by the way, there's a huge coffee cup that a crew member forgot to remove before filming. The Hill Valley section of the ride is so great. It gives the audience a chance to see much more of the iconic and futuristic town than we got to see in Back to the Future Part 2. The details of the buildings are fantastic. At a precise 1/12th scale, thousands of tiny fiber optic lights and miniature bulbs illuminated neon signs, glowing windows, and traffic lights. Honestly, I would have been happy if the whole ride took place in this timeline alone. Look at this glass walkway that connects 2 sections of one house. I don't know why, but I just love that design. We get hit by multiple vehicles. We also crash into the clock tower once more as we make another time jump. That clock tower is just destined to be broken in this universe. We end up in the Ice Age where Biff continues to taunt us.
You back again? Come on in.
You gotta give it to Biff though. He maneuvers the DeLorean really well for a guy from the 1950s. Why is he so good at flying that thing? If I was using a flying car for the first time, I probably wouldn't make it 5 minutes without ending up in a wreck. The Ice Age sequence featured massive miniature sets made of translucent fiberglass, carefully sculpted to resemble towering glaciers and icy caverns. The set was so ambitious that the production crew actually built downward through multiple floors of their studio to create the illusion of a deep, icy abyss. Using detailed lighting inside the fiberglass, the ice structures realistically shimmered and glowed. After the DeLorean loses engine power, we plunge into a cavern. But in the nick of time, the engine finally revs back to life and we reverse into the Cretaceous era. This was another highlight of the ride, in which we encounter a huge dinosaur. This dinosaur stood 9 feet tall on set and took several months to build. While it wasn't Jurassic Park levels of realistic, it was still thrilling to see. We even get swallowed by it, before getting jettisoned out into a flowing river of lava. Biff loses control of his DeLorean and starts to panic. As we all approach a lava fall and cascade to our doom, luck strikes again. We bump into Biff's car, which sends us back to the Institute in the present day. There were 2 slightly different endings that were filmed for this. One where Biff says thank you to Doc and then calls him a butthead before getting hauled off screen. And then there's this one with a familiar callback to the movies. Butthead! Oh! Manure! Now we know why the manure was introduced earlier. When Back to the Future the ride opened at Universal Studios Florida in 1991, the response was electric. Fans lined up for hours, eager to step into the world of Doc Brown and Marty McFly. It quickly became a fan favorite. By 1993, a second version of the ride opened in Hollywood. After experiencing the ride, guests could grab a souvenir at the Time Traveler's Depot, or grab a bite at an on-site restaurant called Doc Brown's Chicken, which served classic comfort food like fried chicken, mashed potatoes, and chicken tenders. The restaurant was fully themed to the Back to the Future universe, with Doc Brown's caricatured likeness on the sign outside, and cheeky historical photos of Doc holding a chicken leg at famous landmarks throughout time. The quirky time travel themed menu included items like gigawatts of chicken in a basket and a Great Scott chicken sandwich, making it a fun, immersive experience that complimented the ride. I wasn't even aware of this place before making this video, and apparently the restaurant closed in 2014. I guess I'll have to get my time travel tenders somewhere else. Over time, the ride's popularity spread internationally. A version opened at Universal Studios Japan, bringing Doc Brown and Biff Tannen to a whole new audience. But time, ironically enough, caught up with Back to the Future the ride. By the early 2000s, theme park attractions were becoming more advanced, incorporating next-gen 3D projections, animatronics, and even augmented reality. What felt revolutionary in 1991 started to look a bit dated. In 2007, they announced that Back to the Future the ride would close in Florida on March 30th and in Hollywood on September 3rd. Fans rushed to take their last flights in the DeLorean before it was replaced by the Simpsons ride. For many of us, it felt like saying goodbye to a piece of our childhood. Choosing The Simpsons to replace Back to the Future made some people, like me, scratch our heads. I do like this scene from the pre-show where Professor Frink tries to prevent the Institute of Future Technology from being sold to Krusty the Clown. But instead, he makes it happen by running over a lawyer who Doc was about to sign a better deal with. Even though Back to the Future the ride closed in 2007, its legacy has lived on through dedicated fans. The ride remains a cherished memory, with fans sharing stories, photos, and videos on websites like Theme Park Review. Fans also got a chance to relive the experience when Universal Studios released the ride's film as a bonus feature in the Back to the Future DVD Blu-ray editions, preserving the adventure for future generations. Although you'll definitely get better experiences by looking up better quality versions on YouTube, the DVD and Blu-ray editions are not in their full aspect ratios, which is just unfortunate. Special credit goes to Retro Recipes for restoring and up-resing the ride's film to 4K resolution, giving fans a high-definition look at the attraction we all miss. Even after its closure, Back to the Future the ride continues to inspire fan-made simulators, queue recreations, and nostalgia-filled videos like the one I'm making right now.
Oh, hello.
As we celebrate 40 years of Back to the Future, it's clear that this franchise, from the films to the ride, will always have a special place in our hearts. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video about Back to the Future, I've got plenty more where that came from. So put some fuel in the subscribe button and turn on notifications. It really helps my channel, and you'll know when my next video comes out. See you next time.